Your home's value isn't held up only by the walls, the roof, or the materials it's made from. In reality, it depends heavily on something far more fragile: water. And across the United States, that essential foundation is beginning to give way. Most people have heard of a housing bubble, but far fewer realize we're entering something even more alarming: a drought bubble. It's a scenario where decades of booming real estate prices sit on top of a resource that is steadily vanishing. In this video, we're not here to bombard you with dry charts. Instead, we're taking you on a cross-country trip to the 10 U.S. cities where this crisis isn't looming in the distance anymore. It's already unfolding. We'll drive straight into regions choking under the megadrought, places growing at breakneck speed even as their water supplies decline at the same pace. The disturbing part? Many of these cities are deliberately downplaying the seriousness of the situation, terrified that a full-blown public panic could erupt if people understood what was really happening. We're going to walk through the hard data, dig into the legal showdowns happening behind the scenes, and expose the strict rules and emergency measures that are already being enforced. And trust me, you'll want to stay with us for the entire ride, because the city that lands at number 1 on our list has crossed a line no one thought possible. They've officially halted all new housing developments because their water supply has run out. That's not a guess or a prediction. It's happening right now. If you suspect your area could be vulnerable, drop a comment below. And if this kind of in-depth investigation helps you see things more clearly, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss future reports the mainstream outlets tend to overlook. Let's hit the road. Our journey starts now. Our journey. Number 10, Miami, Florida. Our journey starts in a city that almost feels contradictory to the idea of running out of water: Miami. Everywhere you look, there's water. The Atlantic stretches along one side, Biscayne Bay sits on the other. With all that, how could Miami possibly struggle with water scarcity? The problem here isn't that water is disappearing. It's that the wrong water is taking over. Nearly 3 million residents rely on a single lifeline for drinking water: the Biscayne aquifer. This aquifer is a broad, shallow layer of limestone beneath the ground that naturally stores fresh rainwater. But as ocean levels keep rising, seawater is quietly creeping underground toward the aquifer. This process, known as saltwater intrusion, is steadily contaminating Miami's only reliable source of fresh water. And once saltwater seeps in, it cannot be undone. The Environmental Protection Agency reports that this underground front of saltwater is advancing far faster than early models assumed. In several zones, it has already pushed several miles inland. To slow the crisis, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is racing against time, investing hundreds of millions into underground barriers and pumping systems just to prevent the aquifer from slipping further into contamination. At the same time, projections from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration warn that Miami could see as much as 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050. That amount of ocean rise would greatly speed up the rate of intrusion. Researchers from the University of Miami have also warned that the long-term costs of restructuring infrastructure or relocating communities will run into the billions. So here's the uncomfortable question. When your one source of fresh water is being slowly overtaken by the ocean, how do you maintain a booming housing market built on luxury shorelines? Miami's real bubble isn't its housing prices. It's the assumption that engineering alone can defeat the pressure of rising seas. The moment that illusion collapses, the economic consequences will be enormous. If Miami shocked you, stay with us. The next destination on our list is facing a crisis that may be even more alarming. Number 9, Atlanta, Georgia. Leaving the coastline behind, we head north to Atlanta, the rapidly growing hub of the American South. Atlanta isn't struggling with seawater or coastal flooding. Its crisis comes from a different source entirely: the states around it. For years, Atlanta has been at the center of one of the longest, costliest, and most complicated legal fights in the nation's history, a conflict widely known as the Tri-State Water Wars. Georgia, Alabama, and Florida have spent decades battling over access to one shared lifeline: the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint River Basin, usually called the ACF system. Atlanta relies heavily on Lake Lanier, a key reservoir within this river network. But as the city's population skyrockets, neighboring states have accused Georgia of drawing much more water than the system can realistically support. During recent droughts, Lake Lanier has fallen to frighteningly low levels, so low that long-submerged roads and remnants of old towns have emerged from the water, revealing the forgotten communities that were flooded when the reservoir was first created. And the pressure is only intensifying. The Atlanta Regional Commission estimates that the metro area will gain another 2.9 million residents by 2050. But where is the water for all those people supposed to come from? Florida claims Atlanta's withdrawals are devastating the oyster industry in Apalachicola Bay. Alabama argues that Georgia's consumption is choking its own economic potential. These disputes have escalated so far that the U.S. Supreme Court has repeatedly had to step in. Collectively, the states have spent well over $100 million just on legal fees, money burned without actually solving the underlying crisis. This is not a sustainable long-term water strategy. It's a fragile balancing act that could topple with one tough court ruling or a severe drought. A World Wildlife Fund analysis even lists Atlanta as one of the most water-vulnerable major cities on the planet. If Georgia is ever forced to cut back its withdrawals from Lake Lanier, the gears of Atlanta's economy could grind to a halt almost overnight. Home builders, developers, and new businesses would feel the blow first as restrictions, or even temporary bans, on new water connections start to appear. Do you think Atlanta can continue growing under these conditions? Share your thoughts, and let's keep heading west. Number 8. Denver, Colorado. Now we head west into the dry interior of the United States and arrive in Denver, Colorado's famous mile-high city. Denver sits right at the base of the Rocky Mountains, and for more than 100 years its growth has depended on a surprisingly simple strategy: capture the melting snow from the western slopes and pipe it over to the much drier eastern plains. That entire system, and Denver's success, has always hinged on one enormous source of water: the Colorado River. Today, Denver and the surrounding metro area rely on that river basin for more than half of their total water supply. The problem is that the Colorado River is collapsing. The snowpack that feeds it has been shrinking for roughly 20 years due to an unprecedented megadrought. With far less snow available to melt in spring, the river can no longer support the 40 million people who depend on it. Data from the National Snow and Ice Data Center shows a steady, long-term downward trend in the high-elevation snowpack that once functioned like a natural reservoir. Because of this decline, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has already issued the first-ever Tier 1, Tier 2, and even Tier 3 shortage declarations on the river, triggering mandatory reductions in water use across the entire region. Denver Water technically holds some of the oldest and strongest water rights along the Colorado River, but that offers little protection when the water simply isn't there to divert. To prepare for worsening conditions, the utility is pouring more than $500 million into expanding Gross Reservoir, hoping to capture more water during the rare wet years and stretch it through the increasingly dry ones. But what happens if the dry years stop being occasional and become the permanent baseline? Denver's population has exploded, and home values have nearly doubled within the last decade. But the uncomfortable truth is that this booming city is built on a water system that's stretched beyond what the changing climate can sustain. The entire real estate market rests on environmental conditions that have already shifted. Keep that in mind as we continue our trip, because the next stop takes us into territory even thirstier than Denver. Number 7. Austin, Texas. Next, we roll into Austin, Texas, a city exploding in popularity and now home to massive tech players like Tesla, Oracle, and countless startups. At first glance, Austin doesn't seem like a place with water problems. After all, the Texas version of the Colorado River flows right through the center of town, and the area is dotted with scenic lakes. But here's the part most people outside the region don't realize. Those lakes, including Lake Travis and Lake Buchanan, aren't natural lakes. They are man-made reservoirs, and at the moment, they're in serious trouble. The Lower Colorado River Authority, which oversees the entire system, reports that combined water storage in those reservoirs has dropped below 35%. Recent drone footage shows that multi-million-dollar homes once positioned right on the water now stare out across dry, rocky ravines. Boat docks that used to float gently on the lake are stranded on bare ground, sometimes hundreds of feet from where the shoreline used to be. Austin's brutal summers are making everything worse. Last year, the city endured more than 45 straight days above 100 degrees. A stretch of heat so extreme it broke every record on the books. That kind of heat doesn't just make life miserable. It accelerates evaporation at staggering levels. At the same time, residents crank up their water use to keep lawns alive and pools filled, putting additional strain on a resource that's already running thin. In response, Austin has moved into Stage 2 drought rules, which limit most outdoor watering to once per week. But those restrictions barely scratch the surface of the real issue. The problem isn't just the heat, It's the explosive population growth colliding with a shrinking water supply. Researchers at Texas A&M University have warned that if another drought similar to the devastating one in the 1950s hits again, Austin's water system could reach crisis levels within the next decade. A metro area that's expanding faster than almost anywhere else in America simply cannot sustain itself with reservoirs sitting so far below capacity. The numbers don't line up. They never have. Waterfront neighborhoods are already watching their property values drop as the lakes continue to recede. And the truth is, this is only part of Texas's larger water emergency. Our next stop reveals an even more delicate and more alarming situation. Number 6. San Antonio, Texas. Heading south from Austin brings us to San Antonio, a city dealing with a water crisis that you can't see just by looking around. Unlike its northern neighbor, San Antonio doesn't depend on lakes or rivers at all. More than 90% of the city's drinking water is pulled from deep underground, from a massive system known as the Edwards Aquifer, a network of subterranean waterways tucked inside porous limestone. For decades, this aquifer was treated almost like a blessing. It delivered exceptionally clean, dependable water, and it seemed practically endless. But San Antonio has grown at a staggering pace, becoming one of the fastest expanding cities in the United States. That growth has created a brutal imbalance. The aquifer is being pumped far faster than rainfall can replace it. The Edwards Aquifer Authority constantly monitors the water levels, and there's a specific threshold that triggers mandatory restrictions. Once the main monitoring well dips too low, sweeping and painful cutbacks kick in. San Antonio has already hit Stage 4 restrictions in recent years, which sharply limit nearly all non-essential water use. U.S. Geological Survey data shows the aquifer trending downward in a way that should worry everyone who relies on it, and this issue goes well beyond household water use. The springs that depend on the aquifer, like the iconic Comal and San Marcos Springs, require healthy water flow to survive. If they dry up, several endangered species would be pushed closer to extinction, and the region's tourism industry would take a massive financial blow. To keep the system from collapsing, the city is scrambling to find additional sources. One of its biggest investments is a 150-mile pipeline designed to haul water in from another aquifer far away. But that solution comes with a steep price tag. The imported water costs significantly more, and the burden of those costs is already hitting homeowners through rising utility rates. When the value of your property relies on a water supply hidden beneath your feet, a supply that's shrinking dangerously fast, you're living in a city betting its future on a resource it can no longer count on. Now, as we leave Texas behind, our route takes us north toward a city facing a situation that's even more extreme, one that some experts describe as almost apocalyptic. Number 5. Salt Lake City, Utah. Our journey now takes us into northern Utah, straight into Salt Lake City, a place where the looming crisis is literally spelled out in its name. The Great Salt Lake, once the largest saltwater lake anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, is vanishing at a pace no one anticipated. For years, the rivers that once kept the lake alive, the Bear, the Weber, and the Jordan, have been siphoned away to irrigate farms and supply the rapidly expanding Salt Lake Valley. When you combine that with the long-running megadrought choking the entire region, you get a disaster accelerating in real time. The U.S. Geological Survey reports that the lake has already lost over 70% of its total volume. What remains today is only a shadow of the lake that existed half a century ago. And the consequences of this collapse fall into two separate but equally alarming categories. The first crisis is simply water scarcity. The shrinking lake is a clear signal that the region's water system is stretched far beyond its limits, forcing increasingly strict conservation rules. The second crisis, however, is much more disturbing. The sections of lakebed now left exposed aren't just harmless mudflats. They're packed with decades of accumulated industrial pollution, arsenic, mercury, lead, and a cocktail of other toxins. As the lake retreats, winds pick up this contaminated dust and blow it directly into the Salt Lake Valley, turning everyday air into a dangerous health threat. The Utah Department of Environmental Quality has already issued repeated warnings about these dust storms. Breathing this material can lead to serious respiratory illnesses, heightened cancer risk, and long-term neurological damage. Imagine living in a place where the air itself becomes hazardous. That is the direction the region is heading. State leaders are scrambling, throwing emergency funds and more than $1 billion into efforts to restore the lake. But most scientists following the issue closely believe the response is far behind where it needed to be. Recovery, if possible, will be slow and incredibly costly. And that raises the unavoidable question, how can a real estate market stay afloat when neither the water nor the air is safe? If you call the Salt Lake area home, we genuinely hope you're taking precautions. Number 4. Los Angeles, California. We now make our way to the state most synonymous with America's water problems, California. And our first California stop is none other than Los Angeles, a city that, in many ways, should not exist where it does. Los Angeles is essentially a massive desert city disguised as a thriving coastal paradise, a place sustained almost entirely by water imported from far beyond its natural reach. Nearly 12 million people live here, yet the region itself offers only a tiny fraction of the water they need. For the past 100 years, LA's survival has depended on transporting water across incredible distances through an enormously complex pipeline system. The city relies heavily on two major sources: the State Water Project, channeling water from Northern California; the Colorado River Aqueduct, pulling water from a river that's now collapsing. Both of these lifelines are failing at the same time. The State Water Project, which depends on the Sierra Nevada snowpack, has been forced to deliver shockingly small amounts, sometimes only 5% of what cities request. The snowfall simply isn't there anymore. Meanwhile, the Colorado River system, as noted earlier in our Denver segment, is in the middle of a historic crisis. The Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which provides water to Los Angeles, has had its Colorado River allocation cut by hundreds of thousands of acre-feet. For the first time since it was created, the agency issued a formal water shortage emergency. Around 6 million residents were immediately placed under strict rules that allowed outdoor watering only once per week. According to Los Angeles' own reports, the city brings in almost 85% of its water from outside sources. Think about what that means. A real estate market worth trillions of dollars depends almost entirely on distant water supplies that are now failing simultaneously. The city is attempting to reinvent its entire water system, investing many billions of dollars into wastewater recycling, capturing storm runoff, and building new infrastructure. But these projects are decades behind what is needed, and they won't catch up fast enough to reverse the damage. Los Angeles real estate has always been built on the assumption that the water would continue to arrive, no matter how dry the region becomes. That assumption is cracking, and once it breaks completely, property values will face a harsh reality. And believe it or not, the next California city on our route is in even deeper trouble, far more dependent and even more vulnerable. Number 3. San Diego, California. We continue heading south until we reach the very bottom of California's coastline, San Diego. If Los Angeles is barely hanging on, San Diego is surviving by pure technical life support. In fact, this city is even more dependent on imported water than LA is. Roughly 90% of the water used in San Diego comes from somewhere else, because local sources provide almost nothing. And here's the alarming part. The city relies heavily on the Colorado River, the most overused, disputed, and rapidly collapsing river in the entire United States. To make matters worse, San Diego holds some of the weakest water rights on that river, meaning it's one of the very first regions to face severe cuts when shortages escalate. Knowing how dangerously exposed the region was, the San Diego County Water Authority made a bold and incredibly expensive move. They poured more than $1 billion into building the Claude Budd Lewis desalination plant in Carlsbad. The idea was simple: turn ocean water into drinking water and secure a drought-proof backup supply. On paper, it looked like a lifesaver. In reality, the price tag has been brutal. Desalination consumes huge amounts of energy, which makes the water it produces nearly twice as expensive as the already costly imported supplies. Those increased prices flow straight to homeowners, placing San Diego among the cities with the highest water bills in the United States. At the same time, housing affordability in the region is already in crisis. According to the San Diego Association of Realtors, affordability has hit its lowest levels ever recorded. Adding soaring water costs on top of skyrocketing home prices is pushing countless families past their financial breaking point. And here's the issue no one wants to talk about. That billion-dollar desalination plant? It only provides around 10% of the county's total water demand. San Diego essentially bought a very expensive insurance policy that covers just a tiny fraction of the actual risk. The overwhelming majority of the region's water still comes from the failing Colorado River system. This is not a sustainable situation, and there is no easy escape from it. If you think desalination is the long-term solution, or not, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Number 2. Las Vegas, Nevada. Our trip now brings us to the city that has become the symbol of the American megadrought, Las Vegas. Few places in the country are as vulnerable as this desert metropolis. Over 90% of Las Vegas's entire water supply comes from a single source, Lake Mead, the gigantic reservoir formed by the Hoover Dam. But Lake Mead is collapsing. Its water level has fallen so dramatically that the bright white mineral-stained bathtub ring around the shoreline now stretches more than 100 feet high. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation reports that the lake is hovering at around 28% capacity, an absolutely critical threshold. The situation has deteriorated so much that the city's original intake pipe, built in the 1970s, no longer reaches the water at all. It literally sits above ground on a dry slope, completely useless. Because of this, the Southern Nevada Water Authority had no choice but to invest more than $1.5 billion in drilling a third, much deeper intake, called the third straw, straight into the bottom of Lake Mead so they could continue accessing the shrinking reservoir. Las Vegas often gets praised for its aggressive conservation programs. The city has outlawed decorative grass, offered cash incentives for removing lawns, and implemented strict outdoor water use policies. But even with these efforts, they are merely slowing down an inevitable decline, not reversing it. The federal government has already issued a Tier 3 shortage designation across the lower Colorado River Basin, the most severe category, which forces states like Nevada to endure extremely deep cuts to their water supply. Nearly everything in Las Vegas depends on water: the casinos, the iconic fountains, the tourism industry, and the rapidly expanding housing developments. All of it rests on a reservoir that is disappearing at a rate scientists once thought impossible. At this point, the city's stability hinges on the hope that an unusually wet year will save them. But as one climatologist from UNLV bluntly stated, hope is not a water policy. Las Vegas is a single severe drought year away from a system-wide crisis that would be impossible to hide. And now, we head toward the #1 most endangered city on our list, where the unimaginable is already happening. #1, Phoenix, Arizona. We've reached the final stop on this journey, and it's without question the most alarming of them all: Phoenix, Arizona. This is where the warnings stop being hypothetical. The unraveling has already started. Like many cities in the Southwest, Phoenix leans heavily, almost entirely, on the Colorado River. Its lifeline is the 300-mile Central Arizona Project Canal, which once delivered huge volumes of water into the desert. But that reality is gone. Arizona was the first state to see its allocation from the Colorado River cut down to almost nothing, and the Central Arizona Project is now operating in a near-dry state. For decades, the city's emergency plan was simple. When the river ran low, pump groundwater. Developers built entire master-planned communities on the assumption that they could always drill deeper wells and tap the aquifers below. But last year, the Arizona Department of Water Resources released a stunning announcement that changed everything. After a decade of studying the region's aquifers, the state concluded that Phoenix does not have enough groundwater to support the subdivisions that are already approved, let alone future ones. And then came the unprecedented decision. The state froze all new housing construction in surrounding suburbs unless developers can prove access to a 100-year water supply. This is the breaking point. This is the moment the so-called drought bubble officially pops. Never before in modern U.S. history has a major metro area been forced to stop building homes, not because of economics, not because of zoning, but because the water is simply not there. A report from the Kyle Center for Water Policy at Arizona State University found that over 80,000 planned homes are now at risk, effectively erasing billions of dollars in future growth. Imagine buying a house in one of these expansions. What happens to your investment when nearby construction is halted and your own well could eventually run dry? Phoenix is the warning sign for the rest of the nation. It's the first domino tipping over, showing what happens when rapid growth collides with a shrinking water supply. The housing crisis isn't approaching, it's underway. This journey has taken us from Miami's creeping saltwater intrusion, through Salt Lake City's toxic airborne dust, all the way to Phoenix, where development has slammed into a wall. The connection between water and property value is no longer a subtle factor. It is the defining issue for real estate in the 21st century. And Phoenix is only the beginning. The drought bubble exists, and it's rapidly deflating. If this deep dive opened your eyes, feel free to like the video, share it with someone who needs this information, and subscribe for more essential breakdowns the mainstream often overlooks. And in the comments, tell us, do you think your city is prepared for what's coming? Thank you for joining us on this journey.